Imagine a world where the latest news could not appear on your phone screen, pop up in a notification, or be shared across the globe in an instant. A world where a king's death, a foreign invasion, or a devastating famine could remain unknown to entire towns for weeks, or even months. This was the reality of the medieval era, a time when the flow of information moved at the pace of human legs, horses, and the winding rivers that threaded through kingdoms. In a period spanning roughly from the 5th to the 15th centuries, news was precious, fragile, and unpredictable. Yet it shaped politics, commerce, and daily life in profound ways. One of the primary methods of transmitting information in medieval Europe was through human couriers. These individuals, often mounted on horseback, were tasked with delivering letters, proclamations, and other vital communications between towns, castles, or king's courts. A skilled rider could cover impressive distances by medieval standards, sometimes exceeding 30 miles a day under favourable conditions. Relays were occasionally used, where one messenger would hand off the message to another at a predetermined station, allowing continuous travel over hundreds of miles. This relay system, though labour-intensive, enabled critical announcements, such as declarations of war or royal edicts, to reach distant regions in a matter of days rather than weeks. In England, for example, the Royal Chancery maintained networks of mounted messengers, and during emergencies, these couriers could carry letters over vast stretches of countryside with surprising speed. Despite the efforts of human messengers, most medieval news travelled at the pace of physical movement, which meant significant delays. In rural areas, news of a harvest failure, plague, or local dispute could take weeks or even months to reach neighbouring villages. People relied heavily on word of mouth, informal networks, and community gatherings. Town criers were employed in many medieval towns and cities to announce new laws, tax changes, or military conscriptions. These criers would march through marketplaces, ringing bells or shouting proclamations, ensuring that even illiterate populations could receive important information. However, by the time news reached remote hamlets, details were often distorted, exaggerated, or entirely transformed, giving rise to the folklore and rumours that characterised much of medieval life. Monasteries and religious institutions also played a crucial role in the dissemination of news. Monks often travelled between abbeys, carrying letters, manuscripts, and oral messages. Many monasteries were linked by ecclesiastical networks that transcended political borders, allowing information to flow more efficiently across regions. Furthermore, monasteries were centres of literacy in an era when most people could not read. Letters, chronicles, and records kept in these institutions preserved information about battles, famines, and political developments. In some cases, the scribes' meticulous attention to detail ensured that certain news items were preserved for posterity, providing modern historians with a window into the slow but structured flow of medieval information.
Trade networks were another vital channel for news. Merchants travelling between cities and across national borders often carried news alongside goods. Ports, markets, and fairs became hubs of information exchange. In bustling centres such as Venice, Bruges, or Constantinople, merchants and travellers could learn about events hundreds of miles away, though the accuracy and completeness of such information depended on hearsay. Long-distance trade routes, including the Silk Road and Mediterranean sea lanes, facilitated communication between distant cultures, allowing not only goods but also news, ideas, and rumours to traverse continents. A trader arriving from the east might bring tales of foreign wars, the spread of disease, or unusual astronomical phenomena, which could profoundly affect local decision-making and public perception. The military dimension of medieval news also influenced its speed. Armies required rapid communication to coordinate movements, relay intelligence, and convey orders. During sieges or campaigns, runners, riders, and signal systems such as beacons or horns were employed. For instance, in England and Scotland, chains of beacons were used to warn of invading forces, lighting fires on hilltops that could be seen across miles of terrain. While these signals lacked nuance and detail, they were highly effective for urgent news requiring immediate action. Similarly, during the 100 Years' War, fast riders were essential for transmitting updates about troop movements and battlefield outcomes, demonstrating that news speed was a matter of survival and strategy in wartime. One of the limitations of medieval communication was the fragility of the written word. Letters were susceptible to loss, interception, or damage from weather and banditry. In some regions, messengers carried messages sealed with wax stamps to ensure authenticity, but tampering and forgery were real risks. Consequently, oral communication remained crucial, and the repetition of messages inevitably introduced distortions. This dynamic gave rise to a culture in which rumour and hearsay often rivaled official accounts in importance. A dramatic story of a noble's death, a miracle, or a plague could spread rapidly by word of mouth, sometimes travelling faster than verified reports. Such stories, while potentially exaggerated, shaped public perception and decision-making across medieval societies. Certain historical events illustrate the practical speed of news in the Middle Ages. Consider the death of a monarch. In England, when a king died, messengers were dispatched immediately to inform distant nobles, governors, and military commanders. The announcement of King Edward III's death in the 14th century, for instance, required weeks for all corners of the kingdom to be notified, a stark contrast to today's instantaneous alerts. Similarly, news of military victories or defeats could reach capitals only after days of travel, influencing diplomacy and alliances long after the fact. These examples underscore how crucial human networks were to the flow of information and how heavily medieval societies relied on trusted intermediaries to transmit vital messages. The role of technology in communication was limited, but significant. Writing materials were expensive, and literacy was largely confined to clergy, scholars, and certain administrative officials. Messages were painstakingly handwritten on parchment or paper, adding time and effort to the dissemination process. Seals were used to authenticate documents, but the physical creation of a message was laborious. In contrast, oral announcements could be made immediately, though with less reliability. In some cultures, mnemonic devices, poetic forms, or rhythmic storytelling were employed to help preserve information across oral channels, demonstrating the creativity with which societies overcame the limitations of literacy and technology. Environmental factors also shaped the speed of news. Rivers were often used as highways for boats, allowing relatively quick transport compared to overland travel. Seasonal changes affected roads and waterways, with snow, rain, and flooding causing delays. Banditry and political instability could block routes entirely, leaving communities isolated for months. Geography, therefore, was a silent governor of communication, dictating which areas could receive news rapidly and which remained in partial ignorance. The uneven distribution of information often led to misunderstandings, delayed responses to crises, and the persistence of regional myths and legends. By contrast, cities and urban centres were relatively well informed. Towns with established markets, fairs, and civic administrations served as nodes of rapid news exchange. The presence of messengers, merchants, and officials facilitated the flow of information more efficiently than in rural areas. In Italy, city-states like Florence and Venice developed sophisticated courier networks for political and commercial correspondence. Guilds and civic authorities
also maintained channels of communication, providing residents with updates on laws, taxes, and communal matters. In these environments, news travelled faster, though still far slower than today's standards. Despite the limitations, medieval news networks were remarkably adaptive. Messengers, criers, monks, merchants, and soldiers formed overlapping systems that allowed information to spread across hundreds of miles, even without modern infrastructure. Accuracy varied, but the combination of written, oral, and symbolic communication ensured that societies were generally aware of critical events. Whether for diplomacy, warfare, commerce, or social regulation, the medieval world relied on human ingenuity to overcome its communication constraints. Interestingly, the perception of news speed in the Middle Ages was relative. People expected delays and adapted their lives accordingly. A week's delay for news of a distant battle was acceptable. A month or more for the report of a king's death was not unusual. This temporal expectation shaped social behaviour, diplomacy, and governance, as rulers and officials learned to plan for the time lag inherent in information flow. It also influenced cultural practices, storytelling, and record keeping, embedding the temporal rhythm of communication into the very fabric of medieval life. News in the medieval world travelled at a pace determined by geography, human endurance, environmental conditions, and social networks. Messengers on horseback, town criers, monastic scribes, merchants, and armies formed a complex overlapping system for transmitting information. While the speed of news was slow by modern standards, the ingenuity of medieval societies ensured that vital information, political, military, religious, and commercial, was eventually disseminated. The fragility and delay inherent in this system gave rise to rumour, folklore, and creative storytelling, highlighting the human desire to share knowledge despite technological limitations. In the absence of the internet, medieval news networks were the lifeblood of society, connecting distant lands, influencing decisions, and shaping the historical record that we continue to study today.